Welcome to the Pala Interstate Leadership Series. Pala Interstate is an employee-owned company that was originally started as a family-owned company in 1973. Here at Pala, we still carry that sense of family and value each of our employees. We recognize that our field supervisors are some of our most valuable assets. This series of videos is designed to help give you the tools to be successful in the field and provide instructions on the Pala way of doing things. This series is also meant to give you a point of reference whenever there is a question or concern. Let's get started with interpreting AWS weld symbols. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a firm understanding of the standard AWS weld symbols used on the drawings that you will see while building API storage tanks. AWS weld symbols can be confusing, so it is imperative to understand the basics. We will be covering what a weld symbol is, why do we have them, the basic structure of the symbols, defining the most common symbols used in our industry, and providing examples of different ways the symbols can be used. Let's begin. An AWS weld symbol is quite simply a graphic depiction of what, how, and where a weld needs to be made. In our industry, welding is a primary function for completing the jobs, and understanding the weld symbols is essential to our success. There's a lot of information in these little pictures, and they can be intimidating at first, but we are going to walk through the form and function of them. They really are meant to be easy to understand. What are all these weird little lines on my drawings? Communication is the key to success on any project. Engineers design the tanks that we build. They must convey all the information that we need in an accurate, simple, and efficient manner. The American Welding Society developed a system of graphic representations that convey a lot of information without adding so many notes that the drawings become hard to understand. Through the standardization of these symbols, lines of communication and understanding are made clear from design through construction and then acceptance by inspection. Let's break down the parts of a weld symbol and what they mean to us. There's the reference line, the arrow, the tail with specifications or processes, the field weld flag, and the weld all around symbol. These are the basic parts of the weld symbol and what you will commonly see. Approach any weld symbol seeking the following information: what, where, and how. That exactly is what this symbol is designed to tell you. We will start with the arrow and the reference line. Every weld symbol will have these two items. They are the backbone of the AWS weld symbol. The arrow connects the reference line to the picture and points to where the weld is to be made. The reference line indicates how a joint is to be welded using symbols and dimensions. It also indicates the side to be welded. Anything below the line indicates that the weld is to be made on the side where the arrow is pointing. Anything above the reference line tells us the weld is on the opposite side from where the arrow is pointing. The reason that they make this distinction is for ease of drawing. Sometimes the draftsman cannot fit the weld symbol on the side that needs to be welded. Other times the joint has a different detail on either side. For example, a weld with a backing strip. You'll need to know which side to put the backing strip on and which side to weld. This will be covered in more detail as we proceed. If there is a tail at the end of the reference line, it gives us a note that is unique to this particular weld. Some examples of what you may see written here are typical. If you see TYP written in the tail, it means that there are multiples of the same type of weld. The engineer is not going to provide individual drawings for each one. They're going to give you one detail and tell you that they're all welded the same. Another thing that you might find in here is a weld process or procedure. If something is to be welded specifically using a type of process or a type of filler metal, those details will be listed here. Any specification that is unique to this particular weld will be detailed in the tail. A blackened flag at the joint where the arrow and the reference lines meet indicates that a weld is to be made in the field. Consequently, if the flag is white in the middle, or there is not a flag at all, it indicates that the weld was made in the shop. This may seem like a minor detail, but it is important to know which welds are your responsibility and if a weld is missing. A circle at the joint where the arrow and the reference lines meet indicates that the joint is to be welded all the way around. There will only be information on the bottom side of the reference line when this symbol is employed, and it is typically used on joints that require a fillet weld. There it is. That's the basics of an AWS weld symbol. Now that we understand that, let's look at the typical types of joints that we will see while building tanks and how they are used in conjunction with the weld symbol. Remember that a weld detail can be different on either side of the joint, and it's important to look at which side of the reference line the information is provided. These joint details can be used independently, together, and/or stacked. Stitch welds do not have their own picture. Instead, they are depicted as the type of weld that they are, typically fillets. Information is then provided for the length and spacing of the stitches. As we proceed from here, examples will be provided as to when you may expect to see these types of symbols. Shown here is a very basic example of a fillet weld detail. The right angle triangle under the reference line tells us that there is a fillet weld on the side of the joint where the arrow is pointing. If the fillet weld symbol was on top of the reference line, it would indicate that the other side of the lap joint is where it needs to be welded. The size of the fillet weld is given just to the left of the symbol. In this case, it's a full fillet. Now let's look at another example. Here we see a drawing that has two different applications of the fillet weld symbols. Notice the detail outlined in red is very similar to the last detail we looked at, but this time the actual size of the weld is called out as 5/16 of an inch. This is the roundabout weld where the bottom plates tie into the annular ring. It tells us that it's a field weld that goes all the way around on the arrow side and references applicable welding procedures in the tail. The weld detail outlined in green is a corner weld. It is also a field weld that goes all the way around the tank. This one is 7/16 of an inch and welded on both sides of the joint. It also gives specifications in the tail. This picture is a perfect example of how much information can be conveyed efficiently with these symbols, as opposed to writing all the required information out. Now let's look at stitch welds, because they are typically fillet welds as well. Here we see an example of the deck for a floating roof tying into the pontoons. The lap joint goes all the way around the roof and is to be field welded. Notice the weld symbol itself is still a fillet weld, and the arrow side of the joint is to be fully welded. The opposite side of the joint is to be stitched. The weld size is still given to the left of the fillet symbol, but the stitch details are given to the right of it. In this case, the first number, 2, is the length of the stitches in inches. The second number given, 10, is the center-to-center dimension of the stitches, not the space between them. So we see that we need 2-inch stitches on 10-inch centers. Now let's look at groove welds. Groove welds are the workhorses of the tank industry. They are found in the shell, annular rings, pipe welds, nozzles, and a variety of other locations. The groove weld symbol is a V shape with the opening pointing away from the reference line. The shape and configuration of the groove will oftentimes be detailed in the mouth of the V and how it is drawn, if it's important. Because you are butting two pieces of steel together, both sides of the joint will be detailed typically, unless it's a pipe weld where there's only welded from one side. You have to know what to do. In the examples here, we're looking at shell plate joints. Notice that the detail on the left shows us that the groove has equal sides at a 40-degree angle, and that the opposite side used a backing, in this case ceramic. The detail on the right has a flat side and a 45-degree angle side. This joint is welded from both sides, thus a weld detail is given on both sides of the reference line. If you've been paying attention up to now, you will also notice that the weld symbol on the left is drawn backwards. The groove should actually be on the top of the reference line because the picture shows it on the opposite side from where the arrow is pointing. But in this case, the information is still clear enough to understand the intent. Now let's look at square butt welds. Square butt welds are essentially groove welds with no bevels. The same rules and considerations apply. Moving on to backing and backing strips. Earlier, we saw an example of ceramic backing, which was a rounded convex line on the opposite side of the reference line from the V of the groove. Backing strips can either be depicted in the drawings themselves, as seen in this example of an annular ring butt weld, or be drawn on the weld symbol as a rectangle on the opposite side of the groove. Backing and backing strips are exclusively used when butting two pieces of metal together and will be represented on the opposite side of the welded joint. Now that's it. Pretty easy, right? So let's look at how we can combine or stack these symbols now that we understand the basic structure of an AWS weld symbol. In this example, we are looking at a nozzle interface with the shell and the weld symbols on the left. The arrow side of the weld indicates that a 15/16 groove weld with a 5/8 inch fillet weld on top of it. The symbol closest to the reference line happens first. Pay attention to the weld sizes. They will not always be the same. The opposite side of the joint on the repad only has a 5/8 inch fillet weld. Also notice that these are not field welds. These were welded in the shop. There is not a black flag attached to the weld symbol where the arrow and the reference lines join. You need to go look at these welds before accepting them in the field. Never assume that because they're welding in the shop that they're good. Always double check them. So that's it. What do you think? Not so hard, right? We are striving here at Pala to help you in your careers. Please take this information and use it. It's the real stuff that makes a difference on how well you can efficiently work your jobs and have confidence that you know what you need to do. It also makes interactions with the clients, inspectors, and others around you easier. It shows a level of confidence and competence that just might set you above your competitors. Never be afraid to ask a question, even if it sounds silly to you or sounds like something you should know. We're all learning. None of us are perfect, and we all need help sometimes. Making a decision out of pride can hurt your career and truly cripple the company. The decisions that we make every day always have dollar signs attached. But aside from that, we want to make sure that we're operating in a safe and a professional manner. Thank you for taking the time to watch this Pala Leadership Series video. We here at Pala strive to improve the way that we do business continuously. If you have any further questions or if something unique pops up that has not been covered in this material, please follow up with your supervisor or your manager and get a clear answer before proceeding to do something incorrectly. You have the full support of the company behind you. Please let us help you be successful, and let's be successful together.